Welcome to Book Lounge by Libby. I'm Joe, and I'm so happy you're here. Welcome to week 2 of season 3. This week, we're diving into historical fiction, one of the most popular genres around. Whether it's a Victorian heist or a 70s road trip, we've all likely taken part in the genre. My guests today each have a unique voice in the space. Joining me today are Christina Baker Kline, Heather Webb, and Lauren Tarshis. Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thank you so much for being here today.
Hi, thank you,
Hi. Thanks for
Joe.
having us.
Everyone.
To help our audio only join friends, listeners, that's the word, it's just listeners. I'm going to have you go around the room and say your name and your most recent book. I'm going to let the alphabet be my guide. So, and by first name, Christina, I'm coming to you first.
Great. Hi. Hi, everybody. I am Christina Baker Kline, and I have a novel coming out May 12th called The Foursome that takes place in Civil War era North Carolina.
Very exciting.
Yeah.
Heather, hello.
Hi, I'm Heather Webb, and I'm the author of The Hope Keeper, which comes out May 19th, and it is Jazz Age DC about the curse of the Hope Diamond and the last socialite who owned it.
Incredible. And then Lauren, I'm sure you've got like a bunch of titles coming out this
I
year.
do. Well, I'm Lauren Tarshis. I write the I Survive series. I have, let's see, what's coming out. My most recent chapter book is I Survive the Dust Bowl. The most recent graphic novel is I Survived the California Wildfires. And I guess the next step is a beautiful graphic novel adaptation of I Survived Pearl Harbor.
Mm.
Wow.
Wow.
I'm immediately like, how many I Survived come out in a year, and do you ever get exhausted?
I know. Well, I do. I used to, so there are 25 chapter books, and each of those, I used to do 2 a year. Now I only do 1 because it was just, I stopped doing 2 a year fairly quickly into the 16 years that I've been doing this. And they're bringing out 2 of the graphic novels per year. So, in those, the reason that we can do that is because each of the graphic novels are created by a different artist or team of artists. So, it's really, they're all very different, which just to me adds to the joy of this adventure of watching my work be transformed by these unbelievable artists and made accessible to different types of readers.
It's so cool to hear that it almost is like you have a bit of art, like a piece of art out of each book. Do you get to pick the artists, or do you ever like give notes? I know that's such a silly thing to ask, but
A great question. I mean, I'm so lucky because my editor, Katie Weir, and our art director, Katie Fitch, we're such a team and we all kind of have the same taste. So they make their picks. Katie Fitch makes her picks and then we look at them and the artists then do little trial characters and scenes. This is the latest graphic novel. So for those of you who can see it, just to show Christina, Heather, and Joe. But they're beautiful. And so we look for sort of a balance between real kid appeal and accessibility, but then we do want to have artists that can bring about the emotional layers of the characters. And often it's a different, I mean, I've learned so much about graphic novel adaptations. I don't know, Heather or Christina, if you're aware of how this all works. I certainly wasn't, but there's a whole script writing process that goes
oh, wow.
on. A woman named Georgia Ball writes these gorgeous scripts that are at times 300, 400 pages. And those are really, that's the bridge, the creative bridge between my chapter books. She then determines, kind of really provides these detailed instructions for all of for the artists. Very often we'll have an artist who does the outlines, the inks, and then there's someone else that does the color. So these are all just different pieces of the world of graphic novel creation. And thousands of people out there who are contributing to graphic novels in different ways.
Oh,
Interesting.
that's right. That's so cool.
Mm.
Also, once you held that cover up, I was like, ah, yes, my TikTok has been absolutely taken over lately by the Scholastic Book Fair. And the number of times I've seen that cover on my TikTok, I was like, makes sense. The new I Survived, going hot. But for the group, let's start with the big one. Why historical fiction, and what drew each of you into writing your version of the past?
I was never a historical fiction reader. I fell backwards into it. I I always thought, what's the point of historical fiction? If I want to read a novel set in the mid-19th century, I'm going to read Madame Bovary, or whatever. And I never even thought about reading historical fiction. With that said, calling the 70s, 80s, and 90s historical fiction
It
from the
hurts.
from the 20th century is insane to me. Um, but uh, but there are different kinds of historical fiction. I think you're probably seeing that here today as well. And I I fell into this genre, I suppose, by stumbling on a family story in my husband's family about the orphan trains. His grandfather had ended up on what they called an orphan train. None of us had ever heard about it. He never mentioned it. It was this sort of hidden in plain sight story. And that novel, which is called Orphan Train, is actually set, two-thirds of it is in the present, and only 100 pages is set in the past. So
Yeah.
I didn't even, when people started talking about it as historical fiction, I was like, but is it?
But is it? Yeah.
But as time went on, I realized that there were these hidden stories that I really actually did want to tell. And the thing about reading contemporaneous fiction, meaning fiction that was written at the time in which it, the time period, is that there are only certain people writing them and getting published. And many of the stories that are still interesting, in fact, perhaps in some ways more interesting to a contemporary reader, were not explored at the time. So that is one of the things, in my view, that historical fiction can do at its best, which is to illuminate hidden corners and moments and stories that were ignored or overlooked because of gender and race and location in the world and all kinds of things.
Yeah, such a beautiful way to look at it of like this is kind of reclaiming a bit of what was just kind of like lost to us or forced out of the spotlight to kind of recenter. I find my way into historical fiction by the route of I'd like to learn a little bit more about this, but I don't want a nonfiction take. I still want to be swept up into it. And so right, something like Orphan Train where I'm like, didn't know about it, but now I want to know more is exactly what really pulls me in.
Yeah, I think that's huge. I think that the other thing is what fiction is all about is imagination. And there are just whole pockets. In fact, even with the book I just researched, there were whole sections that are not in the historical record, huge gaps. And those are the gaps I think that fiction writers try to fill. Anyway,
And
it's
and
fun.
I'm
Yeah,
with you. I
absolutely.
I do hate that 70s, 80s, and 90s count. I did a lot of research to be like, can I say the 90s? Because I don't want that to be true, but they say 30 to 50 years can count as historical fiction. So I'm just gonna
In
take
all
my
of our
vitamins.
training,
I'm
right?
like, a few of us are historic in this podcast right now.
Oh gosh.
Exactly.
Heather, what brought you into historical fiction?
Yeah, I wish I could say it was sort of a plotted out thing, but for me, so I was a high school teacher for a decade, and a track coach, and I was on the verge of resigning because I had a 2-year old and an infant on the way. And the crazy thing is, before that even happened, I was finishing my master's degree. I was taking students to France. I was doing a million things as we do, especially as moms and as teachers. And I kept dreaming about Josephine Bonaparte. And this is bizarre because I didn't know that much about her. I mean, I knew kind of the basics, but she kept coming to me in a dream. And I finally went to the library and checked out a biography about her and started reading about her. And I was so taken with her crazy life and just the French Revolution itself. I was a French teacher, so there's a natural affinity there for that kind of history. I thought, I think I'm going to write a book about her. And I just remember turning to my husband in bed that night and saying that. And he's like, what are you talking about? I had never said that before. I had never thought I'm going to write a book. I did do a bunch of essay contests in high school and college, and I was copy editor of the high school paper and the college paper. It was a large college, 25,000 students, but I still didn't really connect with writing on that level. So I literally had to have the muse sort of smack me over the head in a dream for several weeks before she was like, come on, this is the path you should take. So yeah, I started researching and going to conferences before I'd even finished that first book, and fell in love with fiction. I'd always been a huge reader, that kind of tale that many of us writers have. Yeah, and what's crazy is I paused for a hot minute and wrote a big chunk of a young adult novel because as a high school teacher, I had that voice in my head. And I love teenagers. I still love teenagers. I know that makes me not a typical adult, but I love all the experiences teenagers go through, those intense emotional turning points in their lives, all that stuff. So I started
Everything
writing.
feels like the end of the world when you're a
It
teen.
does.
Yeah.
It does. And they're desperate for an adult role model that's not their parents. And
Yes.
I think I just love all that about that experience. So I'd started that, but I just kept getting pulled to the historical fiction route. And the stories that have been untold, the strong women, just all this great material, I really got sucked in, and I haven't found my way out yet. So
And no complaints about that. Like
none at all. No, I absolutely love it. This is my 11th book coming out in
wow.
May. So, yeah.
Busy. Busy.
Yeah.
And with not that many years from like dream to 11 books now. Like
Yeah, but I also, in fairness, I have to say that I've written solo novels, and then I have a sometimes collaborator, Hazel Gaynor, who's also a historical author. She's an English author, and we write together sometimes. So I'm counting those books in my numbers. So it's a little inflated. Uh,
you wrote them. They count. And Lauren, how about you?
I think I came to it a little differently than Christina and Heather. I had written a couple of just classic, like not classic, but middle grade, straight up middle grade fiction novels. Emma Jean Lazarus fell out of a tree. Emma Jean Lazarus fell in love. And I really loved doing those. At the same time, in my day job, I was writing a lot of narrative nonfiction for in my role at Scholastic Magazines, where I was for 36 years writing nonfiction for kids of different ages. And I got more and more entranced with narrative nonfiction, really as a reader. I loved David Laskin and David Gran and, just these David, the Lewis and was it David? They're all named David. I'm like, is
Yes.
this? They are all David McCullough, Lewis and Clark, those big Joe, you'll know, like those big, unbelievably, those iconic narrative nonfiction stories, Hampton Sides. So I loved those. So when I had the idea for I Survived, it really came much more from the standpoint of the classroom, because in my role at Scholastic, was just in classrooms all the time, working with teachers all the time, trying to create stories that would be engaging to all kinds of readers. And I noticed I kept hearing from teachers that when I started writing narrative nonfiction stories, those were the stories, even if they weren't in the curriculum, that the teachers were using because they were engaging, especially those boys.
Mhm.
So I started to learn, more of the research skills and archive skills and historical society. So when I had the idea for I Survived, initially I really wanted it to be narrative nonfiction. I
Yeah.
thought that would be cool because I'll be like the David Gran for 9-year-olds, something like that. But the problem is, and as I think this is a little bit of a riff on what Christina said about, kind of lost stories, whatever. Kids were not well documented. I wasn't able to reliably find. Certainly, you can find some, accounts like on the Titanic. You had well documented accounts of the children who survived that in many cases. But as I wanted to get more, I got a lot of input from kids. My readers started telling me what they wanted to, what they were interested in. It just became clear that I would need being able to write historical fiction is very liberating, right? You have all sorts of, you can think, you can make up stuff. So it was really by necessity that I decided to do historical fiction. But I also find that I can reliably find enough documentation on children at different times to ensure that, those fictional characters are inspired and based on real people. But I wanted to actually ask all of you, because I have this metaphor I share with kids, and I've always felt it's like not the right metaphor. So maybe Christina and Heather can refine this. But I think that writing historical fiction, I find it to be very challenging in a way, though it's liberating to be able to make things up because you're really writing two stories, right? And to me, the first metaphor I had, I sew. So I was like, oh, it's like a quilt, but it's not like a quilt. Then I was like, no, it's like weaving. No, it's not weaving. It's not. Now I kind of see it as building a ship in a bottle where the bottle, this rigid, the rigid case for the story is the historical event, right? We can't really deviate. If you're writing about the orphan trains, you have to be in this time period and these geographical locations and the types of trains and the stops and all of that. But then, and you're sort of reaching inside the bottle to create an intricate story that can sit and fit inside this. So anyway, I was like, "Ooh, I have a chance to try my metaphor with actually historical fiction writers to see if it resonates."
Those are all good, Lauren. I like
Oh,
that.
thank you, Christina.
So the way I think about it that just frees me and helps me and also I think grounds me is Hilary Mantel, who's a goddess of fiction set in the past. She wrote Wolf Hall and many other books. Always said that she wrote contemporary fiction set in the past. And I love that freedom. Um, it's, I mean, part of the sleight of hand of writing fiction set in the past is that you want to show the humanity of people at whatever time period it is, whether you're Madeline Miller writing about, the ancient times, or whether you're writing about the 1920s, or 1980s, 90s.
Right.
But the real challenge is when you start getting more than, say, 100 years ago, and you're actually dealing with people whose worldview is quite different. So you want to make them as human as possible. You want them to be relatable, if that's a word, to a modern audience. But you also need to show the forces that are on them that make them behave differently than we might in their circumstances. And I think I've sort of, I would call it maybe gaining courage along the way, or I don't know what it is, but I have gone further into the past with each book. And the book that I'm taking on next is actually set even further in the past in the 17th century, 16th,
I love
17th.
that. Bring it on, Christina.
I
I'm
know. I
excited.
mean, what am I doing? It's ridiculous. But I do think that when I have now done two novels that begin around 1840, and that was so terrifying to me. It's such a different moment. And especially writing about 1840s in North Carolina when there was so much going on. And when people, frankly, there's still a lot of psychology that's similar, but when the actual circumstances of the laws were very different. And so all of that was a huge challenge. But I think, again, it's about humanizing these characters, right? And trying to show what it is that we share with them at the same time with illuminating what's different.
It's like a level of responsibility to, right, keep that rigid, like back to the ship in a bottle metaphor, keep the rigid, but give the audience, instead of having it be the past to say like, oh, well, things were just different then. You have to make them empathetic to your characters. You have to make them understand the trappings of the situation, but then also sell a modern narrative set in the past.
Yeah, I'm actually a little bit similar to you, Lauren, in that I think of the history as the scaffolding of a story, sort of the frame of a house, and the story itself is the people moving through the house and around the house. They have nothing to walk on if you don't build the scaffolding, right? But the house itself is not the story. The history is the framework. It's not the story itself. And I think I do a lot of writing teaching and writing coaching. And that's something that's hard for beginning historical fiction writers to really wrap their brains around. They want to get sucked into every detail and let the history take over. And I get that. It's fascinating. And we think readers need to know every single detail. But really, that's not the goal, right? It's really to tell this heartfelt story with characters that stick with you, that then inspire you to go research more on your own.
Right. That's when you want to
Yeah,
find the deep dive. You want to see the YouTube essay video. You want to find the
exactly.
like 12 episode podcast about this one niche subject. But right, like right, it's a taste. You're encouraging. It's that educational background that you all seem to have of just like, I want to teach the world something, even though it's not necessarily in the like, here's the moral of the story sense. It's just the like, history's cool. Let's get into it.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, I had just my last book, Queens of London, is about the first all-female crime syndicate in 1920s London, and I obsessively went down the Peaky Blinders rabbit hole after that, just because, again, you get excited about this topic and you just kind of go off on it. So, yeah.
Now, since you all dance around different time periods, do you ever feel a responsibility to history? Is your responsibility the story first? How do you determine how far back you're going or what's next?
I'm very lucky because I'm told what to do by my readers. They're
Fair.
very, they're very bossy. So, and actually, that has been confounding in some ways. When I first started writing this series, I really thought I was going to write about long ago remote things that would never happen again, like the Titan, like a ship hitting an iceberg or something, these things. And right away, I started getting notes from kids. And when I would go to schools, they would, raise their hands and they wanted 9/11, Hurricane Katrina. I mean, I never thought I would write, speaking of the sort of definition of historical fiction we were bandying about earlier. I thought this is not going to, this is long ago, but I think that, I, I'm, it took me a little bit to really tune in to say, I'm actually, this is great. This is the communication channel that I want to be responding to. And of course, also, Heather, that teachers are very outspoken as well. So I was hearing from a lot of teachers and librarians. So I end up often getting, a whole chorus of recommendations for a particular topic that I try not to do. Like, most recently was the Black Death. So many kids were writing to me asking for a book about the Black Death, which I thought would be quite actually difficult because there's not a lot of not much survives in terms of, and certainly no accounts of kids who survive. Most of those records were burned down and or lost completely. And I didn't ignore it, but I tried to sort of push them off for a couple of years. And then I remember being in a school parking lot and walking toward the school for an appearance. And this little boy, I love these like fourth grade boys. They look very professional, they're like, and he comes up to me. He's like the ambassador of his
Uh-huh.
friends. And he said, "Are you Lauren?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "Well, my name's Hudson, and we want you to write about the Black Death." And so I said, "Hudson, can you tell me why so many kids are asking for the Black Death?" And he said, "Because of COVID. We want to know, we went through our own pandemic. We want to know what it was like, back in the time of castles and, when there were no doctors." And I thought that was so interesting. I thought, now I understand. So that actually also helped me approach the story, right? Because COVID, what I think was so, what we learned in COVID, what we experienced is that life does go on, that human impulse to keep living. I want to go to school. I want to have the birthday party. We're going to figure out how to see our grandparents. That was true back in the 1300s as well. Life did still somehow take place. So I tried to capture that.
Whew. I mean, I know what that like fourth grade ambassador energy is, so I can't imagine being confronted with that regularly.
It's heavy.
Do you find that, because I know for Christina and Heather, like once your audience is cemented, they're in the audience. Yours is aging. Do you find that they stick? Like, what does that trajectory look like? And Christina and Heather, I promise I'll leave you to answer the question as
I'm
well. But
fascinated by it.
I think it's a little, this might be pretty arcane. And obviously it's dating me, but I think it's a little bit. Years and years ago, this was like going way, way back. I was offered a job at Brides magazine. And it had this like legendary editor. This was shortly after I graduated college. During the brief period I did not work at Scholastic because it's in my whole career. And I wondered the same thing, like, how do you, like, you're aging out. But what's amazing to me is I was told, well, you have that bride while they're planning, and then a new bride. Then there's the new bride coming in. So it's really I'm very fortunate, and unlike Christina and Heather, my books really are I give all the credit to building my readership to teachers. So
Mm,
many of my readers discover the books in their classroom. So it's the teachers that are that constant. And then new kids come into that third grade classroom and they're introducing them, the librarians, and the librarians, the educators.
that makes sense. And do you ever hear from readers who have just stuck around for a while? Now Hudson's in seventh grade and he's saying, "Hey, Lauren, I'm still waiting for your take on the on this other historic event."
Well, it's true. I mean, now I've been doing it for 16 years, so my readers now have beards and children of their own, which is pretty intense. But they do. I mean, it's a really the whole. That's what I just feel almost overwhelmed with joy at the community of my readers, and I feel like we're all very connected. And I just did this big event in Johnstown, Pennsylvania, and I had men coming in with a 30-year-old man who brought in books that he kept from when he was, I guess, 15 years old, and he had me sign them. And so it's a lovely experience to have kind of connection with a reader.
I love that. That's the thing that always fascinates me with that kind of like late juvenile, early middle grade kind of that transitional time of how it sticks. Christina and Heather, how do you navigate like what the history means to you? How far you're willing to go? What kind of time you want to tackle? Christina, I'm thinking about you saying like I'm going further back than I have before, and kind of like, and why am I doing it?
I know, totally. Um, I'll talk about that, but I wanted to first just say to Lauren, I do have a sense of what that is because when Orphan Train had been out for like a year or two, they asked me to do a middle grade book so that parents and children could do a book club together with the older book in the year. But it was actually such a bizarre, like time traveling sort of problem, which is that in one of them, the central character was 17 in Orphan Train and she's 12 in the other book. And it didn't quite, it was just a strange
Right, right.
light thing that I was like, "Why? I cannot, my headache." But I had I've had kids grow up reading my books and then coming to events who read them quite young. And Orphan Train is actually the kind of book some people read when they're 13. So that is a really interesting thing, and I've often thought that that's a great joy of being someone who writes for, that audience that you've got these people growing up with you. I also have a whole theory about the fantasy, romantasy, all of that now, which is that all these kids growing up with Harry Potter and Christopher Paolini and all of these fantasy books were craving that on the adult level, and so now they're
Yes.
reading fairy sex and things.
Right. The romantasy boom is
Yeah.
purely because of like the combination of dense fantasy
Yes.
at our young age, but then also fan fiction. I think
Totally.
that's the melting pot that led to the romantasy explosion. Because
It makes perfect sense, and you can see because these books were so readable and so compelling and long and discursive and filled
yeah,
with plot twists, and so it feeds quite naturally into an adult version of that, in my view. I have yet to write that article, but
but
that's
you
what's
should.
I think that we'll wait for it. That sounds
yeah.
Right.
Where it's been done. But so my dad was a historian. He was the chair of the history department at the University of Maine for many, many years. No one in my family wrote fiction, and I sort of thought, that's a separate thing. My mother also wrote nonfiction books, but I have discovered that actually my research methodology, now that I'm down this path, is quite similar to my dad's. I write longhand. I take notes, in notebooks. I was looking at my stuff the other day and realizing this is like what my dad used to do. But for better or worse, I really do try to stick to the facts of the story. And especially when I'm writing about real people, which I've now done a few times, I don't want to misrepresent anything huge.
Mhm.
You have a lot of freedom as a writer anyway. It's kind of like in college, I wrote a lot of poetry. I took a lot of poetry classes. And when you're writing a Sestina or a Villanelle,
Mhm.
you're following a very strict outline. And what's amazing is the creativity you can have within it. So even when you're writing fiction set in the past that relies on facts and tries to get the facts right, there's so much freedom in that for writing about the way people really felt about each other, or even things that we don't understand about stories that we've heard about, real things that have happened. How in the world would that happen? Why would those people even be attracted to each other? Or how would, how did they get from point A to point B? And so as a fiction writer, you're able to really look at the gray areas and explore them in a way that I think illuminates those moments for people. Sorry, Heather, for you. Next.
No, no worries. So you wanted to know sort of like why or how we choose the time periods we choose
Yeah.
and what takes us there. Yeah. So um for me it starts with uh well, the first one was unusual with the dream. The rest have been a combination of an eye on the market, and which you hate to talk about that when it's a creative field, but it's a real thing, especially with historical fiction. I mean, if I could write whatever I wanted, I would probably live in the Victorian era and the Belle Epoque era in France and England and never come out. But that's not always popular. So and unfortunately there's always a little bit of hierarchy too. Like, so you kind of have to go with so there's all that. But I usually watch a little of the market, but also hit upon some kind of inspiration. Honestly, I'll be watching something or reading something. And then if it's an idea that sticks, I'll do a deep dive and like, are there other books about this? How many? Um, what kind of research is available? And then I kind of go from there. Like Christina, I've written a few biographical historicals, but that's not my favorite. I'd have to say my
Mhm.
favorite is to have an event or some kind of premise with fictional people moving through that space. It's just a lot more freeing and inventive for me personally. Yeah, which is a good reason why I work the Hope Keeper. So Evelyn Walsh McLean, who was a real woman, her husband owned the Washington Post, and she owned the Hope Diamond necklace. uh she's a secondary character in the book. She's not my main character. I have a fictional jeweler who is who tends to her collection, which was very large, that Harry Winston ended up buying at auction later after she passed away. But yeah, so I could create a story in and around these characters in this location that were true to life. I mean, you get
Mhm.
lots about DC developing during that time, and women working at the Smithsonian Museum at that time. So there's still loads of historical tidbits that we all love, but I definitely created a fictional space within that scaffolding. So yeah, it has to appeal to me. And then I kind of throw it at my agent and I'm like, what do you think about this? And she'll be like, no way, just walk away from that right now. We're not going to be able to sell that. Or she'll say, oh, I love this. Let's add this element or whatever. And I find I'm getting more and more creative in terms of what I'm bringing in. There's a little bit of a mystery element in this, in the Hope Keeper as well. So yeah, and that's been super fun to kind of expand that way within this historical fiction space.
I think it's really interesting that before you like research, you have to research. And there's like another level to it as well. I mean, I'm a fan of saying the quiet part out loud, but like especially in a genre like historical fiction, you have to see if there is a need to be met with it, or what is the reception going to be like, so that you can keep doing what you love, which is writing. I mean, there's something about that that's the like, okay, this is on the this is on the wind. We have this new film coming out and it could be a beautiful tie-in, or
Yeah,
there's a lot
exactly.
of projecting to do across the board. but then to also just have to see like what articles are going to be available to you, what
Right,
resources can you get
right.
your hands on. Even though you're not writing narrative nonfiction, you still have to be able to set it properly.
Absolutely. I mean, there's people like Stephen King who can write a book about JFK's assassination, and then he can turn around and write about, a dome in the desert that's dystopian. But I'm not Stephen King. So I do have to kind of do that upfront research and think about what readers want to read, what the market wants. What do I want to write? That too, which is first and foremost, honestly, always.
So that I'd love to ask all of you, like, what does inspiration look like? Because you all are beholden to finding a spark in things that already exist. It's such a different perspective than I mean, Heather, even your dream of like, sure, she was there knocking on the door, like, please write my story. But how do you find your way into something outside of some of that, like what's trending right now?
I feel like we're heading for Lauren here.
We're putting you in the hot seat
Oh,
first.
well, actually, I really want your opinion on all this, not to put you guys on the spot. So as I said, I get so much input from my readers, and they're like my market study, Heather.
Right.
That's what they want to read. That's what I want to do. So I wrote a book called I Survived the Attack of the Grizzlies, which was really fascinating because it was a story of this gruesome animal attack that happened in Glacier National Park in 1967 of in which resulted in the death of two women. But it actually brought about this unbelievable transformation of laws, regulations in national parks around the country because it illuminated this dysfunctional relationship that humans were engaging in with the wilderness and in the national parks of throwing litter everywhere and goading animals into into fights over garbage heaps and stuff. So I love that there was this sort of that wasn't just this gruesome attack. I really try to choose topics that have some connection with kids today where they can think, well, why is this relevant to me? What was learned from this? How does this relate, in the case of Black Death and COVID, what are the comparisons? So that it's not just this, I'm not, even though kids are always sending me, any storm or anything that happens, like you should write about this. I'm really most interested in bringing kids into not just another time or place or event, but a line of thought, a conversation with their parents or grandparents or each other. And then, so I got a lot of notes from kids asking for another wildlife story, like Attack of the Grizzlies, but there aren't many. I mean, there's lots of gruesome animal attacks that I could write about, but that's not the point of of my series. Now, years ago, I had become fascinated by this wilderness area in Botswana called the Okavango Delta, which is a fully protected inland wetland that's the size of the state of Delaware, where it's like the last bastion of wilderness of a particular size in Africa, fully protected by the government. 150 more elephants than anywhere in the world.
Wow.
150,000 last bastion of big cats, and just incredible work that scientists are doing there. And of course, home to black mambas, all my readers' faves, the fourth grade, there's so much like fascinating stuff. So I proposed to my editor, I said, there's no true story that happened there. There's no like famous plane crash where a kid had to survive on their own. There's no real event. So could we try keeping it within the main line of the series to have a kind of a slight pivot where we would have I Survive wildlife adventure that is, I like the way Christina mentioned Hilary Mantel's, it's a fictional story set in the past. So this is a fictional story set in this rich wilderness where I traveled with this. I went there. I traveled everywhere I write about. So I went there and traveled with a lion scientist, a zoologist, and learned. So the inspiration for me, and I think I'm hearing from echoes from Christina and Heather as well, is that you want to be able to take some risks, to travel further back than you ever did, to add mystery elements to your Hope Diamond story. But I am a little scared, even though I've talked to like a million librarians about this. I'm like, do you think it's okay if it does? And it's not historical because you can't call it historical fiction. I mean, honestly, California wildfires. Technically, it's 2018. Is that historical fiction? I was really amazed that every single teacher and librarian and bookseller I spoke to about this really felt that my job in our ecosystem of writing and reading is really about engaging kids and getting kids to
Mm.
read. So adhering
Mhm.
to adhering to the genre by the book maybe is not as important. But I would love your thoughts about that, because it's sort of, it is taking a different, I wanted to be able to expand the canvas of the
Mhm.
stories that I'm writing, still have the same mix of fact and fiction. In fact, probably if you list the number of facts and learning opportunities in this book, it's longer than in my other books, because there's just all, this whole idea of how an ecosystem works and what humans are doing. So that is, I think, being able to follow those inspirations and take readers, to on, they want more of these stories, and being willing to expand my conception of the series to accommodate new inspirations and
Engagement is it. Yeah, you said it. I think that's
Yeah.
exactly, I mean, that's what we want too, isn't it, Christina? I mean, I want engagement with readers. I want them to be inspired to go look up more things that they read about in the book, but they want to know more, and they go look, or they go to the local museum, or they go see a play about it, or whatever. I think that's the perfect way to think about it.
okay, well, good. I'm glad you think so. As a teacher, your former teacher yourself. What about you, Christina?
I think
How do you,
engagement with yourself is so important. I think that the biggest thing that I feel is not to hem myself in by my own fake rules about what my life, my career is. I've just written 2 thrillers with my dear friend Anne that we published one in September, and the other one's coming out in March, next March, that we're revising at the moment. But I don't want to be. In fact, I left an agent and went to a different agency because I wanted to be able to do a lot of different kinds of things.
Good for
Also, like,
you.
look at Andy Weir. Look at the way people take chances and do different kinds of books. I mean, someday fantasy may have an element in one of my books. Who knows?
right?
The other thing I would say is I just wanted to push back a little bit on like what the market will bear. I feel like our agents are always telling us what the market will bear, and they don't really know. Right now, historical fiction is not the thing. It's not. It's people are like, don't write historical fiction. Not to me or you, Heather, or you, I assume, Lauren. But we have established careers, but for people coming up, it's like movie studios aren't buying that, and people are reading this other stuff. There are always trends.
Mhm.
The book that I'm writing next, I was at a cocktail party, a group of writers last week, and a woman there was told me that she was. I didn't even tell her what I was writing about, what I was focusing on for my next book, but she told me about her next book which was just denied by her agent, and it was the same time period and the same kind of story, and I thought, my agent never said anything like that. My publisher's thrilled about it. It's like these rules are so arbitrary, and sometimes you just have to write the damn book you want to write.
That's
Um,
right. Make it amazing and just go for it.
yeah,
Well, I think
Right.
you're right. You're right. You're so right about that. And we are so fortunate to be established and not coming up now. And I love to share this tidbit that was said to me offhandedly, by one of my editors years ago, that when I first came up with the idea for I Survived, Barnes and Noble, didn't want to take many of them because they said kids don't read historical fiction. So they took a few.
And you've
And
got
now they're eating
adaptations.
crow.
Right.
Right.
I mean, and now Barnes and Nobles is like they're so wonderfully supportive of I Survived. I mean, I'm like so grateful to them. But I think the point is we do know that, and then, there's Harry Potter. Who would have thought, kids would want to be reading about, a boy who didn't know he was a wizard yet, this,
no,
set in
100
England.
pages. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, Joe,
Yeah.
you just see this all the time. I mean, I guess my point really, my bigger point is publishing can feel like a lot of lemmings heading off a cliff. And, something is big, and then suddenly that's the thing that everyone wants to do. And then by the time, if you start following those trends, you're 2 years behind anyway. And so it just seems to
Yes.
me at a certain point, you have to try to let go of the noise and, do what you really love.
I love that point, Christina, because I'm thinking, like, to your point, your thriller was incredible. And it's, you have to leave the people who don't want to support the expansion of the career because you have the skill, you have the cachet. It's all there. Like I Survived can exist as exactly as you have it set, but it can also expand because I think you, Lauren, have a very specific mission in front of you to just get kids to read. So if there is still that barrier of, I don't necessarily want the historical fiction, that kid may be an animal lover. Like that, there's so many angles that I think still fit. I think it's the like, yeah, we all have to be mindful of what's going to do well. To your same point, Christina, like, sure, historical fiction might not be hot right now in publishing's eyes, but I see what monthly checkout statistics look like. I mean, like, this is a top circulating genre always. At the end of the year, we look at what checks out across the board, and historical fiction is always in the top five. And that's just the case. And in most instances, it'll be in the top three geographically. So it's I don't know.
That's always lovely to hear. Yeah,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
they're like, oh, no more World War II books. And World War II is like, everybody thinks World War II is all that historical fiction is,
Right.
and that's really, I've never even
And that's
written
how
a
you
World
know they're
War
not
II book.
looking at historical fiction because I'm
Right.
like,
It's a big genre. Yeah.
Well, I'm
right.
thinking on another level of like Belle Burden's memoir. Okay, everybody said divorce memoirs are out. There are way too many of them. Nobody wants to read them anymore. We've got plenty. And then her memoir comes along and blows everything out of the water. There are a lot of reasons for it. I think it's fascinating. I mean, memoir is so fascinating anyway. And in fact, 2 years ago, people were like, nobody's buying memoir anymore. It's just not true.
It's so
It's just not
ridiculous.
true. Yeah.
Can we, Joe, can
Yeah.
you invite us back to just talk about Belle's memoir, which I'm obsessed with?
I
Absolutely. As I'm
haven't
like,
read it.
Oh
Apparently,
my
I need
God.
to.
So it is riveting. And yeah, but it's true. And I think that the other piece I just wanted to add to the question of, author choice and trying to um, consider one's own journey when, you're about to, you guys are spending, I spend a year on each book. I'm sure you guys are spending longer is, with the world as it is right now,
mhm.
I really didn't want to write about another disaster, or I wanted to take a break.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Well,
So I
when
thought, instead of taking kids, I promised them World War One, like that's every kid is one asking for that. But I thought, you know what, right at this moment, I'd rather not write about a world war. I'd rather take the kids to a beautiful place where, guess what? They're preserving it. Humans are doing a great job. People are working together. So to show something, still telling a terrifying story, but one that is in a place that they can look up and it's intact and they can feel good about.
I think that's an important point because, right, as the reader and as the like representative of readers here, we want escapism. Like, yes, we want to learn. We come to each of you for different things, but we still want to escape. And right, with everything going on in the world, on any day, sometimes you have to, like, I had to DNF a book this morning because I was like, my anxiety is through the roof,
oh my
and
gosh,
I
I want to know
was
what
like,
book it is.
and it's a great book, a beautiful book. But I was just like, oh, these characters are hitting all of my worst spots.
Yeah.
That like these are just the things that like, oh, I'm seeing too much of like what I criticized myself for. And so right now we have to put you back on the shelf, and in 6 months I will come back to you.
Mm.
And you know what I picked up because I needed to boost my mood? Goosebumps.
Oh,
like
wow.
like
Yeah.
Aw.
sometimes you just have to grab like the tiniest thing to flip back over. Like it doesn't matter what it is. So I think making that space for everyone is important. Um, how do you all balance when the world is heavy, when you're writing in something so tragic, dark, wherever your own created characters are taking you? How do you bring some balance back into your life? What do you set up for yourself?
That's a wonderful question. I would twist it just a little bit because
Yeah, please.
just to say that actually my righteous anger fueled me in this book. So this novel, the Foursome, my new novel that's coming out in 6 weeks or whatever, is based on a true family story. It's my mother's great great aunts were these sisters in mid 19th century North Carolina who married two men who were among the most famous people in the world. They were Chang and Eng Bunker, the original Siamese twins, and they had 21 children. They lived on adjoining hillsides. Chang and Eng had been essentially sold into slavery by their mother when they were young, and then a British merchant took them and displayed them all over the world as an oddity. But they were brilliant guys and they bought their own freedom fairly quickly. And then they turned it around and they made so much money by appearing at the Ritz behind velvet curtains and wearing tuxedos and charging people $30 a ticket to come in, and with a glass of brandy and a cigar kind of thing. That when they moved to North Carolina, they were the richest people in the county and they had this incredibly large house. But they also became slaveholders. They had a plantation with
Mm,
37 slaves. These boys, these men who had been in a similar situation ended up slaveholders. So that was so fraught and complicated that this book was a 6-year project. I put it aside for 2 years. I was canceled by myself, and then my publisher agreed with me. They were like, "Oh, right. Maybe you shouldn't do that." And then I secretly came back to it for a few other reasons that I'll talk about on tour. But anyway, my point is, what I discovered is that the issues, as I kind of alluded to earlier, the issues of my novel are actually alive and well, or not so well today. And that many of the divisions that I am talking about, and there's a huge Civil War part of my book, are actually playing out. Human nature does not change that much. And people today, because of laws changing, behave differently. But there are people who would not behave differently if they lived then. And so it's fascinating to I was able to sort of look at the world today and think about what humanity is like and what it was like then. And that helped me kind of
yeah.
create a bridge to the book for myself.
A righteous anger is important to hold on to sometimes. Sometimes it gets through. Sometimes it's also just like what tells the story we need told.
Yeah, exactly. So anyway, that's my thing. Heather, what about you?
Yeah, I think so the Hope Keeper is actually the perfect example of escapism because you're looking at the history of this mysterious diamond that
Mhm.
has so many legends attached to it. What could be better than dipping into that? I've had a rock collection, which is a little bit embarrassing to say out loud, but my whole life since I was about 7 years old, I've always been a little bit of a closet scientist, and just fascinated by it. And I have a master's in geography, actually, if that tells you anything. Yeah, so it was really escapist for me to think about how I can take the legends around the Hope Diamond and weave a much more modern sort of mystery baked into these real people's lives. The McLeans were royalty in Washington, D.C. I mean, they were friends with the president's wives and diplomats. And, she rode naked horseback wearing only the Hope Diamond. We're talking very Great Gatsby esque
A little bit.
kind of craziness. So it was quite an escape dipping into that world. And I find all my books are a little bit like that. I like a little bit of dark glamour. Queens of London with my all female crime syndicate, they were after this giant heist. And I also have the first female detective at Scotland Yard as a character who's going after them. And there's an orphan on the run. And, so I'm always looking for a lot of factually based things happening, but sort of a dark glamour, fun element too.
I
Your
think that's
build
your genre, Heather.
exactly.
Yeah, I like grit glamour, dark glamour. I don't know what you want to call it, but yeah, thrown in the past, something like that. Yeah.
And being able to build your needed escape in because that also it's the like right what you want to read, but also what other people need. And so that escapism, it's ready and waiting for you.
Yeah. Yeah. I love it.
Lauren, how about you? Is there anything you do to step back because you're on these research trips at times and
I feel that I love, for me, the reward is that I spend so much time with kids. I go on my research trips, but I'm now really, I was in 100 schools this year. So most of them in person, but a lot virtual as well. But so for me to be able to be, physically like with my readers
Yeah.
is such a source of joy. I'm so grateful for it. I really am trying to just relish this, and think what an experience to be able to be a part of classrooms, and I just get so much. It's so refreshing. So I find the writing process extremely challenging and grueling. And it's very lonely. And I write millions of drafts, and it's a mess over here. So the fact that I have the opportunity, even during the research process, during the writing process, to take these breaks and be back with kids, that fuels me in ways that I can't fully even express.
I love that the step away is built into the process. I think
Yeah,
that's incredible.
it is. It is.
I have to tell Lauren really fast that my son does not like to read, which is a great tragedy to me. He's almost 17. He loves the I Survived books. He did. He's not reading them now, obviously, but he was reading them. That was the one thing he would always check out when they had to go to the library and check out a book, read a book for school. It was either, a couple of those graphic novels like Diary of a Wimpy Kid and the Nate books and those books, and then I Survived. And my daughter loved them too. So whatever you're doing is amazing. So keep doing it.
Like I'm feeding them up to you all. I'm like, and then they're going to read Christina and Heather books and love historical fiction. So
You're the start of the pipeline.
Yes, I think part of it, but it really is the teachers, I have to say, who are the getting those kids. And I think the last thing I'll just say is I'll put in a little pitch for reading in general. And Joe, and that's another conversation that we could have. I'd love your perspective, because there's so much grim news about reading and kids and stamina, but I see so much vitality. I'm just amazed. No matter what school I go to, in everywhere around the country, there is still so much excitement about parents love seeing their kids reading books. And there's so many amazing librarians. And so I'm going to take that. I'm just going to stick with that, and try not to be too depressed about the statistics and test scores and stuff. And hopefully we can build this back. There's a lot of areas of strength.
Absolutely. I think there's a lot of room for positive growth and understanding the importance of books in languages other than English in school libraries and in classrooms. So that way we've got ways to work in, skills and we've got accessibility kind of covered on that front. The advent of graphic novels and so many beautiful adaptations. Of course, we're looking at the I Survive series, but shoot, they went and they made Animorphs into a graphic novel series. Now I'm dating myself. But I think of like some of those kind of like I think all the Bailey School kid books are also now like a graph from Scholastic Graphics. So even just adopting, so that way we're meeting kids where they're at. There's always an avenue in, so that way we can continue to grow the excitement of reading. But I know I can't keep y'all forever as much as I'd like to. I have to let you all get back to writing at some point. So Christina, Heather, and Lauren, thank you so much for taking the time to join me today.
Thank you.
Thank
It's
you for
so
having
fun.
us.
Loved it.
It was so fun. I know. Thank you very much for all you're doing, Joe. And Christina and Heather, I'm such fans. So thank you so much for sharing.
I love talking to other writers. Yeah.
Christina said she went to a cocktail party with other writers. I want to be invited to a cocktail party.
I know. I'm like, I need an invitation to this.
Right.
So I could do that stuff. But yeah, it's so fun. And Joe, you were great. Thank you.
Thank you. And listeners, you can check out everyone from this episode. All of their links are in the show notes. You can find their most recent books. And thank you for checking out this episode. Make sure you're subscribed, doing all that podcast stuff so you don't miss our next episode, which is Thursday, where we will be giving you plenty of delightful historical fiction recommendations to add to your TBR. And next week, we're diving into a conversation all about book jacket design. Thanks so much for joining us, and happy reading. You can sample and borrow the books from today's episode in the Libby app, or if you're a librarian, find them for purchase in Overdrive Marketplace. Book Lounge by Libby is a proud Evergreen Podcast signature program. Explore more amazing shows at evergreenpodcasts.com. This podcast is produced and recorded by me, Joe Skelly, with editing by Andrew Alonso. Our theme music is High Five by Rex Banner, used with permission. Book Lounge by Libby is presented by the Libby app. Learn more at libbylife.com/booklounge.